Hello, everyone. I'm going to begin with the good inside and outsiders with my responses. One of the things I just want to clarify before I go into the Stump the Professor questions, which were outstanding this term, thank you everybody for your work on them, is that I don't have answers and I can only respond the best that I can in this moment for what I know, and it is always kind of a moving target to figure out how uh, these change in time. And you might ask me in a year the same question, and I might have a different angle at the question. You might ask a professor from a different uh, area of study, maybe someone in from psychology or someone from business or someone from political science, and you're going to get a completely different response. And that doesn't make this invalid or that invalid. So, as we jump into the Stump the Professor questions, I just want to make sure that we are coming at it as a dialogue, not a monologue. So, in that note, the first question is, how do you address conflict with a positive outcome? All right. So, how do you address conflict? So, I listened to the team meeting so I could hear you talk about it. Thank you for having such a good dialogue. That really helps me kind of frame it. One thing I want to first start off with this question is positive outcome can't be really defined, or it has to be defined. I mean, we can't control positive outcome. We can't, uh, we, even if we set the goal, set what a positive outcome looks like, even if we know how to define what we want going in, when we go into conflicts and we're managing our relationships, those outcomes they're not they shouldn't be exactly fixed points. You should have a little bit of ombre effect of the goal so that as you get more information and learn about the other perceptions and other experiences and what other things other people are dealing with, you can shape that goal and positive outcome for the other person. And I would say most of managing a conflict is actually that. It's actually setting the expectations and setting the goal. So when you're approaching a conflict, when we say how to address a conflict with a positive outcome, we need to approach it to know what you need. You need to do all the work going into it to know what you need, but you also need to go into it to hear what others need. And then it doesn't mean you have to give up what your outcome it is that you need, but you should have some wiggle room to be in a true dialogue. Uh, Dun, 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 dun. Okay, the other part of this question that I think needs to be addressed is that I think a lot of this question is really about, let me just get my notes. I have a lot of notes. They're kind of messy, but we got notes. So when we think about, when I listen to the discussion, what I was really hearing is this idea of avoidance as a preconceived notion that avoidance was the way to manage a conflict and kind of deal with the discomfort of it by pulling back a little. And now with the class, there's an awareness that this is a lose-lose, and it is not necessarily um, the undercurrent of what you were hoping to accomplish when you were avoiding conflict before you had more knowledge around it. So when we think about that, the real question, I think, of this one, listening to the conversation, if I were to restate it, is how do you approach conflict when you have a predisposition to avoid it when someone else shows up with negativity or defensiveness? And that happens quite a bit. Now, we can't control how other people are going to engage in the conflict. We can only control ourselves. We can set clear boundaries And that means that that definition, I think when you said positive outcome in the question, you were getting really close to the answer because it's really how you define what that is and how the other parties or person in the conflict is defining that. And it's to, when I say you need that ombre of wiggle room, it's really that goes back to goals. It goes back to if this is the topic goal, are you making room for the relational goal? Are you making room for uh, the process goals or whatever goals that are kind of embedded in the conflict? That's really the wiggle room you need in defining it. Uh, so in this class, we are not looking for anything fixed or rigid. We are looking for managing things across periods of time and that relationship dimension. And when we make room for that, we are moving uh, into collaboration, which is that high concern for self and high concern for others, and finding the intersection that maintains self respect and it stays in dialogue. And we're able to be curious and articulate all of the complicated elements that make up whatever the conflict is that you're in. So, the answer or the response is that you need to, if I were to condense it down, you need to be clear about what you need. You need to hear what others need and manage that friction of difference and without abandoning yourself or the relationship and using time and expanding conversations over long, long periods of time to turn the conflict into a collaborative. It really, the conflict actually becomes transformative. And then the relationship becomes something you can lean into when there's a conflict. There's actually a comfort in seeking out the other and seeking out difference. That takes a lot of time to get there, but it is possible. And some of the tools in here need a lot of practice and stumbling and mistakes and imperfections on your part and the other part to find your way through that. Okay. The second question, what's the difference between linguistic relativism and linguistic determinism? All right, so this is a great one. This is really, this language comes from the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which is from linguistic studies. And Sapir-Whorf were two anthropologists who were really studying indigenous languages and through colonization and these different ways that we have infiltrated different cultures and cultures coming together and immigrant cultures blending with other immigrant cultures. And it's called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. So like a hypothesis, it's constantly being tested. So linguistic determinism. It really is this idea that the language you speak determines what you can or cannot know. Basically, it says that if you don't have language for it, you can't know it, which is a little too rigid. It's largely rejected now in more contemporary research when it's tested, and there's a lot of stuff about that. If that sounds interesting to you, I definitely have a lot more materials I could send you about that, but it's largely rejected. It's really good as a starting point to think about how your language is shaping the way that you are experiencing the world, and that language is really limiting. There's a limit in it, and it actually proposes that there's more to know than than we have language to say, which is kind of a very exciting thing to think about. Uh, Now, linguistic relativism is very different in that it is much more accepted, and it is it's also has a lot more room for us to consider. So, relativism is how language influences how we think, how we perceive and interpret experiences. Uh, and so, yeah, we use language to try and capture or explain how we're feeling. And sometimes people stumble over their words and say, I have this feeling, but I'm speechless, or I have no words to describe this experience of joy, overjoy, or for extreme grief, or other feelings. And this is why we have art, right? We have poetry and art and abstraction and music, because sometimes we find the expression of art has a vehicle for us to connect our experience in it in a way that language kind of limited us. So linguistic relativism is is really about this idea that language is influencing you, but it's not a trap. There's more to explore, where linguistic determinism kind of has this boundary. If you don't have language, you can't know it. But you probably have, because we have connection to the internet and YouTube videos, you may have stumbled on some videos where other languages in the world that we have exposure to, German, Japanese, have a lot of words that we can't translate into English. All sorts of languages have non-translatable words, but then when we learn the meaning of it, we're like, I know exactly what that is. I have that experience. I just had to use a sentence to explain it, not a single word. And that's why we want to lean more into relativism, because it it matters more for how we are trying to understand how to manage conflict. So, in ling in linguistic, let's see how when we talk about using linguistic relativism, this is why we tried to think about metaphor, and we tried to think about, we've done a lot of creative projects, and we have like even from the very beginning with the introduction post, all of these things were a way to think about the way we were perceiving things, and 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 decoding messages in alternative ways for us to tap into language and culture and our prior experiences and how our identity shapes, and language is only part of the way there. So um, if we are in a conflict, we really want to be able to see how these things, how the worldview and how the language of the other person is being used, for us to be able to take misaligned perceptions, be more curious and lean in, and move towards alignment. I feel like all three of the questions from this team, you all did a really good job. They kind of go together. And that brings me to question number 3, which is, what is, okay, oops, not that one. How do we address a situation where there is too much empathy? How do we address a situation with when there is too much empathy? Okay, so I have quite a bit to say about this too. Uh, First, there is no such thing as too much empathy. And when we're talking about empathy as a communication skill that you need to enter into dialogue, empathy is uh, it's not quantifiable. This is a skill, and we need it to really progress into relational sustainability and relational development and our own well-being. However, on that note, when we talk about the feeling of that there's too much empathy, what we're really talking about is distress. Okay, let me get it right. Distress, what is your level of distress tolerance? So, what do I mean by this? Distress tolerance. And this is the ability for you to remain present to be engaged, emotionally regulated, um, when things are uncomfortable, when there is emotional discomfort, or someone else seems like they're in distress. Uh, and how much can you say? It doesn't mean that we want people to be in distress. We do want to help when there needs to be help. But when someone is dysregulated themselves, how much can we tolerate? And because some of us have very low, and I'm going to say us because I am in this camp, um, and it's not an issue of empathy. That's a different thing. Distress intolerance uh, is really when we're maybe rushing in. Our baseline is to rush in to fix it, to rescue it, to this is where over accommodation lives. This is where we think we're avoiding conflict, but really what we're trying to do is just smooth it over, fix it, stuff it away. Okay, or let's deal with that later. Scarlett O'Hara, she's like, we'll think about that tomorrow, right? All of these things of the way that we deal when problems come up. And this is something we develop and become a habitual habit to manage our own anxiety. Okay. So sometimes this gets convoluted with empathy. And remember, empathy is perception taking, checking. It's all these things where we are encountering a different idea than what we're used to, and we are willing to be curious. We're willing to validate that there might be a different point of view other than our own. And we are not trying to erase someone else's experiences because it doesn't fit our needs or it doesn't fit the situation. Now, one of the things that came up in the team when they were discussing or trying to figure out how to word this question was what's happening in group dynamics when things are out of balance, when you might have someone who is given more let's see, maybe more time, let's just say more time. Maybe they're given more, oh, they're over talkers, or there's something going on where they are given more than anyone else in the group. And there's some type of imbalance in consideration for their perspective over other people in the group. And that is a different issue than empathy. Even if the person who is getting that has used their distress or used some aspect of their life as a way to get more than other people. And what we would want to do is think about how we are using public spaces or shared spaces, coworkers, that we are setting the expectation clearly of how we engage in this space, and then accountability for that. We need to keep it in check. So let's say there's someone who, oh, okay, gosh, I'm thinking off the top of my head. That's not a good idea. I'm probably going to say something ridiculous right now. But, mm, okay, so this would be the idea that uh, someone is jumping in, someone says, oh, I am X, so I need, you know, all of this here. I need 1 through 10. And they're like, well, we can't give you, there isn't room in this space for you to have 1 through 10. You can take 1, 2, and 3, and then we need to make sure that we get other people into the dialogue. I'm just using these numbers to create an abstraction, but you can fill in the blanks, hopefully, like an algebraic equation. Fill in the variables with the situation that you might be able to put this in. There's this idea that you need to set the norm. You need to set the expectation from the very beginning. And someone's like, no, I need, right? Whatever it is. And this can show up in a lot of ways. It can be dramatic, it can be passive aggressive, it can be direct aggressive, indirect aggressive. And those things need to be called out when they happen. If someone's choosing, let's do an office space. Someone's in an office space, shared office space, a little bit of an open floor plan. Let's imagine there's desks here, there's desks here, and then there's, other people around the perimeter with actual doors. So it has the real hierarchy or power dynamic. And there is like, okay, you have a couple people, you have one person who wants a little more remote work or a little more of this because for whatever reasons they're asking for a lot more of one thing and other people are not being allowed or considered or and this is why it feels like, oh, that person got too much empathy. That's not empathy, okay? That is whoever is making the decision about who gets more remote work than another person has a distress in intolerance, and it's because that person created more hullabaloo about their issue than another person who might also have a reason to have remote work. Uh, then and that person is not making a hullaboo about it. This person gravitates to the squeaky wheel. So let's say we have someone comes in the office and they're like, actually, I need this too. And they're like, well, you don't get it because of this, and this person is getting it because of this, and this. And that's just the way it is. And that creates this competition of scarce resource now, the scarce resource of who has to be in the office and who gets remote work or what hybrid patchwork quilt of hybrid and work is happening. You might see alliances forming. And this is what competition and compromise sometimes manifest. They So you get maybe an alliance forming, which looks like a few people in the office who openly whisper or talk behind their hands or have pointed looks. These are they're very aggressive, passive aggressive things. That stuff needs to be said out loud, and it doesn't mean pointing or being accusingly. It just needs to be a simple comment. Uh, it can just be a really simple perception checking comment. Hey, I noticed that you were uh, standing over here whispering, and one of you looked over at me. It made me feel really uncomfortable. I don't know if you meant it to be an aggressive, but it felt that way. And that's it. Did it, or was something else going on? And giving the other person to clarify. That's a conflict. That's confrontational. But if you talk about it when it's this big, when it's really teeny tiny, uh, you might have a chance for someone to jump in with the reason. They might get defensive, they might attack, it can go in all different directions. And it doesn't really matter what the other person's response is. You just said it out loud. And as soon as you say it out loud, you're saying, I got the message that you are unhappy with the situation and I was clarifying about it. And sometimes the energy, that's all it takes for things to get settled. God, I hope I said that well. Boy, I'm going to rewatch this after I record. Uh, Here's how I want you to think about empathy. And this is not my metaphor, but I really like this metaphor of empathy, that empathy is a flashlight, right? Empathy is really just you holding a flashlight and turning it on, and it is about curiosity. It's about shining a light to understand or to see better. But it doesn't mean that you're still the one who has to make the decision. You still have to be the one, you're still the one to decide which direction to take with it and how to use that information to navigate the path and what path you want to take. And those things are really important. So, all right, that's what I got for this one. These are the three questions. These are the three responses that I have. I hope there was some information in there that was interesting and, or at least thought provoking. I'd be curious what you come back with when you respond in your last team meeting to this. All right, bye bye.